The frontier did not teach people gently. It taught them through dust storms that stripped paint from doors, through droughts that cracked the earth like old bone, and through stories whispered at night when the oil lamps burned low. In the small border town of Red Willow Crossing, fear was as common as thirst and just as inherited. Clara May Whitaker had grown up breathing that fear. It lived in the sermons her father preached every Sunday, in the warnings her mother repeated while brushing her hair, and in the way townsfolk fell silent whenever the word Apache drifted through the air. To Clara, fear had always worn the clothing of righteousness. It called itself protection. It called itself faith. Her father, Reverend Whitaker, stood tall behind the pulpit, Bible worn soft from use. He spoke of sin and salvation, of heaven promised to the obedient and damnation waiting beyond the known world. And beyond the known world, according to Red Willow Crossing, lived the Apache silent shadows on ridgelines, giants on horseback. Men spoken of as if they were storms rather than people. Clara listened as she had her entire life. She memorized scripture. She sang hymns. She learned to keep her eyes lowered and her questions quiet. But the frontier had a way of loosening the seams of certainty. The land itself did not match the stories. It was not wild in the way the townsfolk described it. It was patient. It breathed slowly. The desert did not threaten Clara when she walked its edge at dawn. It welcomed her with cool air and birdsong. The mountains did not loom with menace. They stood like old watchers, steady and unmoved by human fear. Still, fear shaped behavior. Clara was forbidden from walking alone beyond the church fence. The river was especially forbidden, a place whispered about in the same tone used for temptation and death. Yet drought does not honor rules, and when the town well dropped dangerously low, necessity pushed Clara beyond obedience. That morning she wrapped her shawl tightly and walked before the sun fully rose. Each step toward the river felt like stepping outside a lesson she had memorized but never tested. Her heart pounded not because she sensed danger, but because she sensed difference. The frontier was quieter than she had been told. No drums, no war cries. Just wind moving through grass. Clara knelt at the riverbank and filled her pail with careful hands. That was when she felt it, not fear exactly, but awareness. The sensation of being seen. She turned. He stood across the river, tall enough that her breath caught. A giant, by the town's definition. Broad-shouldered still, watching her not as a hunter watches prey, but as one human acknowledges another. His presence was calm, rooted, like the land itself had risen to stand before her. Every lesson she had been taught rushed forward at once. Her father's voice, the stories, the warnings. Yet none of them fit the man before her. He did not move toward her. He did not raise a weapon. He did not speak. Clara realized something unsettling in that moment. Fear required noise. It required exaggeration. This man needed none of it. She should have run. She knew that. But the frontier had already begun teaching her a different education, one without sermons or scripture. It taught her to observe before judging, to listen before speaking. So she stayed. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, measured, respectful. He did not use her name. He did not need to. He acknowledged her presence as if it mattered. His words, quiet, almost reverent, would echo in her mind long after. Not a threat. Not a promise of harm, but an invitation to understand. In that moment, Clara felt the first crack form in the wall she had been raised inside. It frightened her, but it also relieved her. Because deep down, she had always suspected that heaven could not belong only to one kind of person, one kind of story. As the sun rose higher, Clara returned to town with her pail full and her heart heavier, not with fear, but with questions. And questions, she was beginning to learn, were the true beginning of faith. The frontier had taught her fear. but it had also quietly and without permission begun teaching her truth. Clara did not tell anyone about the man by the river. Silence came easily at first. It had been trained into her like good posture and proper prayer, but this silence was different. It was not fear holding her tongue. It was something closer to protection. Of the moment. Of herself. In the days that followed, the drought tightened its grip on Red Willow Crossing. The well sank lower. Tempers rose faster. Men spoke louder and listened less. Each evening, Clara watched her father bow his head in prayer, asking God for rain while never once asking the land what it needed. Before dawn on the third morning, Clara returned to the river. She told herself it was practical. The town needed water. But deep down, she knew she was drawn by the quiet certainty she had felt there before, by the sense that something true existed beyond the narrow lines drawn around her life. He was there again, standing on the opposite bank, as if he had never left. The same stillness, the same grounded presence. In the pale light, she could see him more clearly now. Weathered skin, long dark hair bound simply, eyes that held neither hunger nor judgment. He looked like a man who belonged exactly where he stood. She froze. Then remembered how little freezing had helped anyone on the frontier. "You don't have to stay," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "I know," he replied. His English was careful, learned. Each word placed with intention, as though language itself deserved respect. Clara noticed this immediately. Her father often preached about the power of words, yet this man wielded them with more humility than most men she knew. "My name is Taza," he said after a moment. "I scout the river. It feeds many." She nodded, unsure what was expected of her. "I'm Clara." He did not repeat her name aloud, but his eyes acknowledged it, storing it away. Something about that unsettled her in a way that felt honest rather than dangerous. They spoke cautiously at first, like two people walking along the edge of thin ice. Clara learned that Taza read the land the way her father read scripture. He knew when the river would rise, when the wind would shift, when the clouds lied, and when they promised truth. He spoke of the drought not as punishment, but as imbalance. "Nothing suffers alone," he said. "When the land thirsts, people thirst too." That idea stayed with her. It echoed something she had heard in church but never fully understood. As the mornings passed, Clara returned again and again. Each visit felt less like disobedience and more like education. Taza never crossed the river. He never closed the distance between them. The boundary remained, respected on both sides. It taught her something powerful. Restraint could be a form of strength. One morning, as the sun crept higher, Clara finally asked the question that had been lodged in her chest since childhood. "Why do my people fear yours?" Taza did not answer quickly. He watched the water move around stones, patient as the river itself. "Fear is easier than learning," he said at last. "And stories are lighter to carry than truth." Clara felt a quiet shame at that, not because of him, but because of herself. She had never questioned the stories. She had accepted them the way she accepted hymns, repeated often enough to feel holy. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and spoke the words that would follow her long after the river dried and the drought ended. "You'll taste heaven tonight," he whispered, not as a promise of flesh or temptation, but of understanding. "Not with your mouth. With your knowing." Clara did not fully grasp what he meant, but she felt it stirring already. Heaven, she was beginning to realize, might not be a place reached after death. It might be something discovered when fear loosened its grip. When she returned home that morning, her hands smelled of river water and earth. She carried no guilt, only the heavy, hopeful weight of a truth she could no longer unlearn. And for the first time, Clara understood that the giant everyone feared had not come to threaten her world. He had come to reveal how small it had been. Clara began to listen differently after that. Sermons no longer washed over her like familiar rain. They settled, heavy and examined. When her father spoke of obedience, she wondered who decided its boundaries. When he spoke of sin, she found herself asking silently, carefully, whether ignorance could wear the same shape. Each morning by the river added a layer of understanding she had never been taught in the pews. Tazia spoke little about himself. When Clara asked where he had learned his ways, he gestured to the land, the sky, the slow patience of seasons. The world teaches those who wait, he said. Those who rush only hear echoes of their own fear. She thought of Red Willow Crossing, always rushing to judgment, to defense, to blame. One morning, Clara brought bread wrapped in cloth. She placed it on a flat stone between them, not as an offering, not as charity, but as recognition. Taza nodded once, solemn, and left dried berries in its place. No words were needed. Exchange itself became a lesson. Balance, not debt. He taught her how to read tracks near the water, how to tell hunger from migration, danger from desperation. He showed her how animals avoided conflict whenever possible, how even predators chose energy conservation over cruelty. The natural world, he explained, survived through restraint. That is why we last, he said quietly. Not because we are fierce, but because we know when not to be. Clara thought of the men in town polishing rifles they had never fired in defense. Only in fear. In church, her father taught that dominion over the land was God-given. At the river, Clara learned stewardship instead. Taza spoke of land not as property, but as relationship. You do not own what keeps you alive, he said. You honor it. The idea unsettled her deeply, and yet it felt familiar, like a verse she had heard once as a child and forgotten. She began to notice contradictions. Her father preached humility, but the town demanded superiority. He preached love, but the boundaries of that love were narrow, fenced in by skin and story. Clara felt torn between loyalty and honesty, between inheritance and awakening. One afternoon, thunderheads gathered on the horizon, dark and promising. The town rejoiced too early, mistaking clouds for mercy. Taza watched quietly, his expression unreadable. They will pass, he said. They look heavy, Clara replied. So do lies, he answered gently. The rain never came. That evening, Red Willow Crossing blamed the Apache. Accusations spread faster than drought. Clara felt a familiar anger rise then fade. She had learned too much now to accept easy villains. When she met Taza again, she spoke not as a student, but as an equal. My father believes faith is enough, she said. You believe knowledge is. Taza shook his head. Faith without knowledge is blindness. Knowledge without faith is emptiness. Both are needed to walk straight. Those words followed her home, followed her into sleep, followed her into prayer. For the first time, Clara prayed not for certainty, but for courage, the courage to hold truth even when it disrupted comfort. She realized then that the most dangerous education was not the one that challenged belief, but the one that prevented it from growing. The lessons she learned by the river were not found in her Bible, not because they contradicted it, but because they demanded something the pages could not provide. They demanded lived understanding, and once learned, they could not be returned. The trouble did not arrive loudly. It never did. It crept into Red Willow Crossing on low voices and tightened jaws, on men gathering a little closer than usual outside the saloon, on hands resting too long near gun belts. Fear, Clara had learned, rarely announced itself. It preferred to feel justified. The drought had stretched patience thin. Crops failed. Cattle wandered. And when people grew desperate, they searched for someone to blame who could not easily speak back. By sunset, Clara heard the word Apache spoken not as rumor, but as verdict. "They've been watching us," a rancher said. "They're waiting to strike," another added. "We should strike first," someone finally muttered, and the word first settled over the group like permission. Clara stood at the edge of the gathering, her chest tight. Only weeks ago, she might have believed them, might have nodded along, trusting the certainty in their voices. But now she saw what Taza had shown her so clearly. Fear made people loud, not right. She slipped away before anyone noticed, heart hammering, feet carrying her toward the river as if pulled by instinct. The sky was heavy with clouds that would never deliver. The air smelled of dust and coming violence. Taza was there. He was not surprised to see her. He rarely was. "They are coming," she said, breathless. "The men, tonight." He closed his eyes briefly, not in fear, but in recognition. "Yes," he said. "The land warned us." Clara swallowed. "They think you're the reason for the drought." A faint sadness crossed his face. "The land always pays for human anger." She waited for him to call his people, to prepare weapons, to match threat with threat. Instead, he remained still, calm, rooted. "We will not attack," he said. "But they will," Clara whispered. "Then they will carry that choice," he replied. "We will not make it lighter for them." His restraint terrified her more than any weapon could have. "They could kill you," she said. "Perhaps," he answered. "But violence does not become truth just because it survives." Clara realized then what the night demanded of her. This was not a lesson. This was a test she could not avoid. She could stay silent and remain safe. Or she could speak and risk becoming an outsider in her own home. She ran. Back through town. Past shuttered windows and flickering lamps. Straight to the church where her father sat with the men, Bible closed, rifle leaning nearby. The sight of it twisted something deep inside her. "They're innocent," she said, before fear could stop her. "The Apache. They didn't cause this." The room went still. Her father looked at her as if she were speaking a foreign language. "Clara," he said gently, warningly, "you don't understand." "I do," she said, voice shaking but strong. "I understand more than stories. More than fear." The men shifted uncomfortably. One laughed. Another scowled. "You've been listening to savages," someone said. "No," Clara replied. "I've been listening to the land." Her father stood slowly. "Enough," he said. "This is not your place." She met his eyes, tears burning. "You taught me faith without fear," she said. "You taught me that truth stands even when it's alone." The words struck him harder than any accusation. He looked around at the armed men, then back at his daughter, at the courage trembling but unbroken in her stance. Outside thunder rolled, empty and mocking. Finally, the preacher raised his hand. "We will not attack tonight," he said. "We will not spill blood on rumor." Grumbling followed, anger, resistance, but the rifles were lowered one by one. Clara exhaled, knees weak. That night, no shots were fired. No blood touched the dust. And though peace did not settle easily, something vital had been preserved. Later, alone beneath the stars, Clara returned to the river. Taza stood waiting. "You chose," he said simply. "So did you," she replied. He nodded. "This is how heaven is tasted," he said softly. "Not in comfort, but in courage." And Clara knew, as the night finally released its grip, that the frontier had changed her forever, not by teaching her how to fear, but by demanding she decide what she believed was worth defending. Dawn came slowly over Red Willow Crossing, painting the horizon in shades of amber and rose. The town was quiet now, but the tension of the night before hung like smoke in the air. People moved cautiously, their conversations hushed, wary eyes searching for unseen sparks of conflict. Clara, however, felt a clarity she had never known. The choice she had made the night before, the choice to speak, The truth had shifted something fundamental in her. She knew she could not keep her silence any longer. If understanding was to take root in her town, it would need more than her quiet courage at the church. It would require words spoken aloud, words that might shake the foundations of her father's authority and the fears that had bound the townsfolk for generations. Clara stood at the edge of the town square, heart pounding as she addressed the small crowd that had gathered. Her father, hesitant and protective, lingered behind, unsure whether to intervene or allow his daughter to speak her mind. Men and women, some armed, some weary from sleepless nights, turned to hear her. "They are not our enemies," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "The Apache did not cause the drought. They are not waiting to strike. We have been taught fear instead of truth, suspicion instead of understanding." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some faces hardened. Others softened, confused and curious. Clara held their attention with her eyes, the same eyes that had watched Taza move with patience by the river bank. Learning and observing, never attacking. Always teaching. "Last night I had to make a choice," she continued. "I could stay silent, as I had always been told, or I could speak what I have learned. And I have learned that courage, restraint, and understanding are stronger than any gun or rumor." Her father stepped forward slowly. He looked at her, a mixture of pride and concern, and finally, he said what no one expected. "She speaks the truth." His voice carried across the square, firm but calm, breaking the tension like sunlight through clouds. "We have been quick to judge, slow to listen. Let us change that." A long pause followed. Then, one by one, rifles were lowered. Anger ebbed, replaced by the cautious hope of a town beginning to question its assumptions. Men and women nodded slowly, their eyes reflecting the dawning realization that fear had shaped them. More than reality ever had. Clara felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Taza standing there, just beyond the edge of the crowd. His presence was a reminder that the lessons of the river were not just her own, they belonged to anyone willing to listen. "The land teaches all who watch," he said quietly. "And people learn when they are willing to see beyond fear." The town did not transform overnight. Prejudices lingered, whispers continued, and some men grumbled. But the first seed of understanding had been planted, and with it, a fragile but real peace. Clara returned home that morning knowing that truth, spoken at the right moment, had power beyond the fear that had ruled her childhood. For the first time, she felt the freedom of faith intertwined with knowledge, the way Taza had spoken of it by the river. Faith without understanding had once felt safe. Now faith with understanding felt alive. As the sun rose higher, bathing the town in gold, Clara understood the most important lesson yet. Courage was not only about standing against fear, it was about speaking the truth even when the world demanded silence. And in that moment, the frontier did not feel like a place of danger. It felt like a place of possibility. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way Red Willow Crossing had never known. The tension that had coiled through the town like a restless snake loosened, replaced by something new: conversation. People began speaking cautiously, listening carefully, and noticing details they had long ignored: the patterns of the river, the tracks of animals, the weather, and the wisdom of those they had once feared. Clara walked to the river every morning, carrying lessons learned and bread to share. Taza was always there, patient, waiting, never intrusive. Sometimes he spoke. Sometimes he simply observed, letting her watch the world with him, teaching her that understanding often arrived in silence. The town began to change too. Her father, humbled by Clara's courage, started integrating the truths she had learned into his sermons. He spoke of stewardship, respect, and the value of knowledge alongside faith. Children listened with wide eyes, learning that heaven was not just a place above, but a life lived with integrity and compassion on earth. Clara found her own role growing. She taught children how to read the land, how to respect life, and how to ask questions rather than accept fear. She recounted stories of Taza's teachings, not as folklore, but as wisdom, bridging two worlds that had once been divided by suspicion and prejudice. One afternoon, she found herself speaking directly to the townsfolk, explaining the importance of balance. "We cannot survive on fear," she told them. "We cannot thrive without understanding. The land, the animals, and our neighbors all teach us how to live. If we listen, we find our heaven not in riches or conquest, but in knowing how to walk rightly through life." Taza stood silently beside her, a living testament to that message. And the town, for the first time, saw him not as a giant to fear, but as a guide, a bridge between worlds. Seasons changed, rains came, crops flourished, and the river ran full once more. The Apache did not retreat. They became trusted neighbors. Trade and cooperation replaced suspicion and rumor. Clara walked along the riverbank one evening, the sun dipping low, painting the sky in colors she had never seen before. Taza joined her, and they watched the water together. "You taught me courage," she said softly. He shook his head, smiling. "You had it already. You only needed to choose it." Clara realized then what Taza had been teaching all along. Heaven was not a distant reward, not a promise whispered in fear or longing. Heaven was understanding, patience, and respect between people, and between people and the land that sustained them. The frontier, once a place of fear and prejudice, had become a place of possibility. Clara, her father, and the town had learned that courage could shape peace. Knowledge could temper faith, and listening could bridge divides that generations of fear had created. And as she stood there, the river flowing endlessly before them, Clara understood fully. She had tasted heaven, not in a fleeting moment, but in a lifetime of learning, choosing, and forgiving. The giant Apache had kept his promise, not the one her old stories had warned her about, but the one that mattered most. He had shown her what it meant to see the world clearly, to act with courage, and to live with love. In that truth, the frontier finally felt like home.